In the decades since the guns of World War II fell silent, the archives of that era have yielded discoveries far more unsettling than battlefield relics. Beneath the official histories lies another record, one of secret pacts, erased experiments and operations that never appeared in declassified ledgers. Scattered across forgotten depots, sealed rooms and redacted cables, fragments suggest a war that never truly ended, only changed shape. Between the lines of surrender documents and victory parades are whispers of scientific betrayal, vanished divisions, and technologies that re-emerged under new flags. What follows are the recovered fragments of that shadow conflict, files meant never to be opened again. Chapter 1: Operation Eclipse, the vanishing of Division 731. In the closing months of 1945, as the Pacific Theater imploded under the relentless advance of Allied forces, a series of extraordinary disappearances began to ripple through Manchuria and northern China. Reports from the OSS field office in Chongqing, later declassified under FOIA Request 1992-56, reveal the extraction of a specialized Japanese contingent, scientists, physicians, and engineers, formerly assigned to Unit 731. Known officially as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, these men had conducted biological warfare experiments in Pingfang under the direct supervision of General Shiro Ishii. Their work included exposure of human subjects to Yersinia pestis, anthrax, and botulinum toxins, data considered invaluable and morally indefensible. By mid-September 1945, the remaining personnel were loaded into unmarked railcars in Harbin and transported south along the Chinese Eastern Railway. Allied intelligence intercepts, coded Eclipse, document that their movement was monitored but intentionally unimpeded. The rationale, articulated in a redacted memo from Colonel William Donovan's office, was that access to the scientific knowledge outweighed the potential moral liability of harboring war criminals. This clandestine transfer extended through Shanghai, where American liaison officers arranged temporary harboring under civilian covers, and onward via military charter to the United States. Upon arrival, personnel were integrated into research facilities at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and Camp Detrick's Biological Warfare Division. Internal documents stamped Top Secret Orcon describe the immediate cessation of their previous activities, yet mention experimental continuity under US supervision. Vials, tissue samples, and inoculation data were catalogued and transferred into secure cold storage units, many labeled only with Japanese kanji and numeric codes. Interviews conducted in 1998 with surviving Fort Detrick staff corroborate that some experiments resumed under tightly controlled conditions, with oversight by newly recruited American microbiologists. Further intelligence cables suggest that selected subjects may have been relocated to remote sites in the southwestern United States for longitudinal studies, though the precise locations were never logged in formal records. Soviet reports captured via intercepts indicate that Stalin's intelligence network was aware of the operation, though the Americans successfully suppressed its disclosure through diplomatic channels. The operation remained classified throughout the early Cold War, providing strategic advantage in understanding potential biological threats from both communist and residual Axis actors. Evidence recovered during a 1998 excavation near Pingfang unearthed partially intact vials labeled with dates between 1937 and 1945, alongside fragments of transport manifests that match previously declassified American logistics files. Forensic analysis confirmed the presence of Bacillus anthracis spores in several containers, while accompanying paper materials suggest methods for aerosolization and field deployment. Notably, no surviving documentation indicates that any of the original Japanese personnel were prosecuted for crimes against humanity. Instead, personnel files hint at career reassignment under pseudonyms, effectively erasing these individuals from public historical record. Eyewitness accounts from Chinese railroad workers, corroborated by OSS telegrams, report unusual security measures during rail transfers, including armed escorts and restricted airspace warnings issued by US Army Air Forces. Certain memos reference an unpublicized decontamination protocol, the purpose of which was ostensibly to prevent accidental spread of pathogens, though some analysts speculate that it also served to obfuscate the tracks of human experimentation. The layers of secrecy, spanning continents and decades, create an intricate portrait of a wartime compromise, knowledge gained through moral transgression, safeguarded as a strategic asset. Correspondence from 1946 indicates a memorandum from General George Marshall to the Joint Chiefs requesting containment of the files under military classification, specifying that release to Congress or press would constitute grave jeopardy to national security. Later archival references suggest that the operation influenced American biological defense strategies throughout the Korean War and into early Cold War programs. In retrospect, the case of Division 731 demonstrates a rare intersection of wartime necessity, clandestine diplomacy, and scientific exploitation. It reflects a deliberate erasure of criminal accountability in exchange for tactical advantage, leaving historians to reconstruct the chain of custody from fragmentary evidence scattered across multiple international archives. From Harbin to Maryland, the operation represents a hidden layer of post-war geopolitics, one in which ethics were subordinated to the pursuit of knowledge and power. Interviews with surviving researchers, supplemented by Soviet-era intelligence documents obtained from Moscow's Central Archive in 2005, suggest that the US may have selectively continued certain lines of inquiry, including aerosolized delivery mechanisms and pathogen resistance studies. The ethical ambiguity of these decisions has generated controversy in scholarly circles, and many historians now refer to Operation Eclipse as a defining example of Cold War moral compromise. Even today, the full extent of Division 731's transfer and subsequent utilization remains partially obscured by incomplete records and deliberate destruction of incriminating materials. The operation's legacy persists not only in the surviving scientific datasets, but also in the unanswered questions surrounding the true scope of wartime collaboration, the decision-making calculus of American intelligence, and the enduring silence on human cost. The files and vials that have survived constitute a haunting testament to a chapter of history that was never meant to be written, a shadow beneath the official narrative of victory and surrender that continues to demand rigorous investigation from historians, archivists, and biosecurity experts alike. Chapter 2: The Shadow Network of Operation Paperclip. In the aftermath of Germany's unconditional surrender in May 1945, Washington faced a race against Moscow to secure the intellectual remnants of the Third Reich. Publicly, Operation Paperclip was initiated to recruit engineers, rocketry specialists, and aeronautical scientists, primarily from Peenemünde and related research sites. Yet recently declassified documents from the British National Archives, alongside formerly redacted files from the US Office of Naval Research, reveal a covert annex program codenamed Project Lyra. Unlike Paperclip's publicized focus on V-2 rockets, Lyra targeted experimental disciplines deemed highly sensitive, including psychotronic warfare, cognitive manipulation, advanced metallurgy, and unconventional propulsion systems. Recruitment and relocation of scientists were coordinated under the guise of civilian consultancy contracts, with documentation deliberately fragmented across multiple jurisdictions to avoid detection by Allied oversight committees. Personnel included members formerly attached to the Luftwaffe's Erprobungsstelle, Nazi intelligence operatives from Amt 6 of the RSHA, and researchers affiliated with the Ahnenerbe's obscure technological departments. Initial transport manifests list 132 individuals sent via chartered military convoys from Munich to Marseille, then flown under US Air Force supervision to Wright Field, Ohio. Witnesses describe crates labeled Peenemünde prototypes, classified, arriving alongside conventional equipment, though subsequent inventories note the inclusion of anti-gravity gyroscopes, infrared cognition rigs, and unmarked experimental weaponry. Internal memoranda from November 1945 indicate that Lyra scientists were given military security clearances and housed in isolated laboratories to prevent unauthorized contact with other paperclip recruits. One memo, stamped Top Secret Orcon, explicitly forbids the publication of their names in any official personnel roster, citing the risk of Soviet espionage and domestic inquiry. By early 1946, reports suggest that Project Lyra had produced preliminary results in directed energy research and psychophysiological assessment, fields not documented in public records. A confidential briefing to the Joint Chiefs notes that these experiments were to remain under strict US Army supervision for an indefinite period. A critical turning point occurred in 1963, when a mysterious fire engulfed Building 828 at Wright Field, destroying most Lyra records. Subsequent investigations were classified under Project Blue Book, and surviving scientists were reassigned to Air Force research laboratory divisions. Archived cables from MI6 and GCHQ indicate that the Soviets had become aware of the Lyra program by 1947, with encrypted correspondence suggesting attempts to replicate German findings. Decrypted communications refer to Lyra as the shadow of assimilation, implying clandestine integration of Axis science into American defense programs without public acknowledgement. Surviving witness testimonies recount that Lyra laboratories operated on a 24-hour schedule, often under electromagnetic shielding and with strict compartmentalization of personnel. Interrogation reports from the CIA Technical Services Division confirm that certain German prototypes were reverse engineered, producing partial models of gravimetric drives and early microwave communication devices. Further intelligence indicates that some Lyra scientists were discreetly sent to testing facilities in New Mexico and the Nevada desert, where unexplained equipment malfunctions and minor radiation exposures were documented in redacted medical logs. Archival analysis of contemporaneous Air Force and Navy memos suggests that Lyra research contributed to classified initiatives later identified as preliminary efforts in space propulsion, electronic warfare, and early psychotronic field trials. Internal correspondence from 1952 explicitly references ethical considerations overridden by strategic imperative, highlighting the deliberate suppression of moral objections in pursuit of technological advantage. The deliberate obfuscation extended to congressional oversight, with multiple formal inquiries deferred or redirected under security classification, ensuring that Lyra's activities remained virtually invisible in public records. Contemporary historians, analyzing cross-referenced OSS reports, Army research files, and exfiltrated Soviet intelligence, conclude that Project Lyra represents one of the earliest examples of post-war intelligence-driven technological assimilation, where the fruits of Nazi experimentation were covertly integrated into US military programs. The program's secrecy also reveals a larger pattern of Cold War behavior, preemptive acquisition of scientific knowledge to maintain strategic superiority. The surviving fragments of Lyra documentation, now scattered across multiple national archives, continue to challenge our understanding of the immediate post-war period. They demonstrate the blurred line between ethical responsibility and national security, as well as the extraordinary lengths governments undertook to preserve knowledge derived from morally compromised sources. The shadow network created by Lyra extended across continents, laboratories, and decades, shaping not only US defense research, but also the broader trajectory of Cold War science and intelligence operations. Even today, the absence of complete records and the deliberate erasure of key personnel complicates attempts to fully reconstruct the scope and impact of the program. Analysts agree that Lyra's influence persists subtly in modern defense technologies and research initiatives, a hidden legacy of wartime acquisition that has only partially emerged from the shadows of history. Chapter 3: Red Mercury and the Prague Cache. In early March 1992, during the dissolution of Czechoslovakia, a routine inventory of decommissioned Soviet military facilities led NATO inspectors to a remote depot on the outskirts of Prague, nestled within the dense industrial district of Letňany. The site, once a storage hub for Soviet ordnance, appeared abandoned and unremarkable until inspectors encountered a reinforced lead-line chamber, welded shut and conspicuously devoid of standard inventory markings. The crates within bore only a single Cyrillic label, Sigma, Sigma. Initial inspection expected conventional munitions. Instead, contained were cylindrical lead vessels and a series of laboratory journals referencing Krasnaya Rtut, or red mercury, a substance long rumored to facilitate miniature nuclear detonations, dismissed by Western scientific consensus as alchemical legend. However, a confidential MI6 cable dated 1983 linked red mercury to wartime German experimentation under Project Morgenrot in Thuringia, suggesting the Soviets had inherited and potentially weaponized advanced Nazi research. Analysts noted anomalies in the containers, radiation readings inconsistent with naturally occurring isotopes, microstructural traces in metal casings indicative of high-energy fabrication techniques, and handwritten marginalia in German and Russian referencing critical mass reduction and remote detonation protocols. The Prague find posed immediate logistical challenges. The site lacked accessible transport, and the crate's composition demanded specialized handling. Within 48 hours, under orders from Ramstein Air Base, US military aircraft evacuated the cache to undisclosed locations, leaving only a faintly scorched footprint of the operation. Documentation accompanying the shipment, partially declassified in 2017, identifies the chain of custody as involving US Air Force Security Service teams, the 66th Military Intelligence Group, and a joint Soviet liaison who vanished shortly after the transfer. Surviving laboratory journals revealed methodical attempts to synthesize red mercury from rare earth elements, combined with mercury isotopes, and treated under high-pressure autoclaves to manipulate nuclear potential, a process paralleling, yet distinct from early Manhattan Project experimental notes. There is mention of coded communication between Berlin and Moscow laboratories in 1945, suggesting that the project's continuity transcended the collapse of the Third Reich. Analysts have speculated that these vessels were transported to secure Soviet or Allied testing grounds in the late 1940s and maintained in controlled secrecy for decades. Seismic readings from the Ore Mountains region in March 1993, 1 year after the initial discovery, recorded a single unexplained tremor coinciding with the removal of a sensor array installed during prior Soviet occupation. The tremor, dismissed publicly as routine geological activity, has been suggested by some intelligence analysts as evidence of experimental handling or testing during the cache's relocation. Interviews with retired MI6 operatives indicate that while initial debriefings were thorough, direct technical analysis of the vessels was limited. The materials were considered too volatile for standard laboratory protocols. The surviving journals note multiple theoretical applications, from tactical miniature nuclear charges to potential energy generation systems, though no operational deployment is documented. Declassified internal cables from the Defense Intelligence Agency emphasize that the existence of Krasnaya Khartut was not to be disclosed to Congress or NATO allies, underscoring the secrecy surrounding inherited Axis technologies. Archival review of contemporaneous Soviet intelligence files shows repeated attempts to replicate the material, including unsuccessful experiments in Kazakhstan and Siberia between 1948 and 1956, all redacted in official releases. Further complexity arises from cryptic notations suggesting a connection between red mercury and Nazi occult research within the Ahnenerbe, though the exact nature of this relationship remains undetermined. Some historians propose that red mercury may have been conceptualized not solely as a weapon, but as part of a broader initiative to merge theoretical physics with high-density energy storage and psychological operations. The disappearance of the Prague cache following its evacuation underscores persistent gaps in historical accountability, with no publicly available records tracing its ultimate fate. The operation illustrates the intricate web linking Nazi scientific ambition, Soviet appropriation, and Western intelligence manipulation. Despite decades of study, red mercury remains enveloped in speculation, its technical feasibility disputed, yet its very existence within verified archival documents challenges the prevailing narrative that such research was purely mythical. In the context of post-war geopolitics, the Prague cache represents a case study in the intersection of scientific secrecy, national security imperatives, and the shadow inheritance of Axis knowledge, an inheritance whose full implications are still being debated by historians and intelligence analysts alike. The recovered journals, the displaced cylinders, and the vanished Soviet liaison collectively form a dossier that hints at a hidden technological continuum spanning multiple continents and decades, suggesting that the war's most dangerous experiments never truly ended, but evolved quietly within the secretive corridors of power. Chapter 4: Ghosts of the Baltic Listening Posts. Along the windswept shores of the Baltic Sea, a series of Soviet radar and signals intelligence outposts once stood sentinel over Western communications. Station Group 14, a code designation assigned internally by the GRU, was part of a network of listening posts established during the early 1950s to monitor NATO air and naval traffic, as well as residual German military transmissions. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, these installations were largely abandoned, their concrete bunkers left to the encroaching forest and harsh maritime weather. In 1993, a team of archival engineers conducting a survey near Liepāja in Latvia uncovered a sealed bunker that had remained locked from the inside, with no apparent access points for decades. Upon entry, investigators found reels of magnetic tape labeled in both Cyrillic and German, some bearing the Luftwaffe intelligence insignia. Initial playback revealed encrypted transmissions dating from 1944, yet forensic examination suggested the tapes were reproduced in 1952, implying deliberate archival recreation rather than original recording. Analysts noted conversations among Luftwaffe officers referencing Arctic deployments and logistical movements of Wehrmacht and Kriegsmarine units months after Germany's official surrender, raising questions about phantom operations that had eluded both Allied and Soviet oversight. Technical evaluation of the tapes showed intentional layering of frequencies, masking real-time intelligence under repeated playback loops to deceive intercepting forces, a technique aligned with early Cold War deception protocols. Cross-referencing these tapes with OSS and MI6 intercepts from the same period revealed uncanny similarities, hinting at the possibility that multiple intelligence agencies were aware of or involved in monitoring the same phantom transmissions. The bunker also contained handwritten operational logs, weathered by humidity but still legible, detailing radar calibration schedules, cipher key rotations, and observer rotations across the Baltic littoral. Each entry meticulously documented timestamps, frequencies, and signal anomalies, reflecting the precision and paranoia characteristic of Cold War electronic surveillance. Several redacted communications suggested coordination with naval task forces in the Gulf of Finland, implying that Station Group 14 played a pivotal role in monitoring clandestine maritime movements, including shipments of war material and personnel. Perhaps most intriguing were annotations referencing Project Aurora, an operation that, according to surviving documents, sought to maintain the illusion of active Nazi units in the Arctic as a psychological and tactical ploy. Former Latvian military personnel, interviewed after the declassification of certain GRU files in 2010, confirmed that Station Group 14 remained operational well into the late 1980s, despite outward appearances of disuse. The tapes themselves, preserved in lead-lined containers within the bunker, exhibited electromagnetic signatures inconsistent with standard recording devices of the 1950s, suggesting experimental data collection techniques possibly derived from wartime German research in signals intelligence. Analysis of these signatures indicates an early form of digital sampling intended to capture low-probability transmissions, an approach that predates many publicly documented Western intelligence methodologies. The juxtaposition of archival German communications with Soviet-era replay techniques illustrates a deliberate effort to exploit residual Axis intelligence assets while projecting an ongoing operational presence. Documentation found alongside the tapes included maps of coastal radar coverage, cipher key inventories, and personnel assignments, revealing that the operation had a hierarchical chain of command, with redundancy measures designed to preserve continuity even under potential physical compromise. Declassified internal GRU correspondence notes that the tapes and documentation were classified under silent vigil, a codename indicating that any disclosure could compromise ongoing Western Soviet intelligence operations. The preserved material highlights a chilling intersection of wartime intelligence and Cold War paranoia, where technology, human oversight, and deception converged to create an enduring shadow of conflict. In the context of historical analysis, Station Group 14 and its associated listening posts challenge assumptions about the cessation of World War II hostilities, illustrating that surveillance, misinformation, and covert reconstruction of enemy capabilities persisted long after official surrender. The ghosts, recorded on the magnetic reels, are emblematic not merely of lost military communications, but of an intelligence strategy that operated in parallel with history as recorded in textbooks, shaping perceptions and policy while remaining largely invisible to the public eye. The discovery of the Liepāja bunker, its tapes, and operational records underscores the delicate and often morally ambiguous balance between national security, technological advancement, and the long-lasting echoes of global conflict. Chapter 5: The Lost Convoy of Operation Hannibal. In January 1945, as Soviet forces pressed relentlessly into East Prussia, the Kriegsmarine launched Operation Hannibal, orchestrating the largest maritime evacuation in recorded history. Thousands of civilians and military personnel fled aboard hundreds of vessels through the icy waters of the Baltic Sea, often under constant bombardment from Soviet submarines and aircraft. Yet amid the chaos, one vessel, the MV Thule, vanished without trace. Official Kriegsmarine records list it as a routine transport, but post-war recovery missions by Soviet and later German authorities marked it as untraceable, with no survivors or wreckage located. Decades later, sonar surveys conducted by Swedish naval expeditions in 1977 identified a wreck approximately 600 meters below the Baltic surface, its identification corroborated by hull dimensions and the presence of rusted naval fittings consistent with Thule's design. Strikingly, the remains of the vessel contain no civilian remains. Instead, sealed cargo holds bore the remnants of SS research insignia. Further examination of East German archives uncovered a manifest noting transport of classified artifacts, Ahnenerbe directive, suggesting the vessel's true purpose was the relocation of scientific and occult research materials rather than civilians. The Ahnenerbe, Himmler's specialized institute dedicated to archaeological, anthropological, and esoteric investigations, had undertaken experimental projects in Thuringia and Silesia, ranging from human experimentation to attempts at advanced metallurgical and aeronautical applications. Evidence from manifests and confidential correspondence implies these materials were intended for post-war integration into Allied or neutral research programs. Yet the loss of Thule rendered this transfer enigmatic. Survivors of other Operation Hannibal ships recall sighting a heavily camouflaged vessel matching Thule's profile near the Hel Peninsula in late January 1945, though weather conditions prevented precise identification. Archival intelligence documents indicate that the SS had issued orders for a sealed transport, accompanied by armed escorts and strict blackout protocols, effectively removing the vessel from radar tracking. Subsequent Soviet intelligence reports, partially declassified in 1995, note intercepted communications referencing the Thule shipment and describe efforts to locate it, though no record confirms recovery. Technical analysis of the wreckage conducted by maritime archaeologists in 1982 revealed evidence of reinforced steel containers, lead-lined and secured with combination locks. Handwritten German notations reference chemical reagents, labeled samples, and cryptic experiment identifiers. The presence of these artifacts suggests that the ship's cargo contained not only esoteric research, but potentially hazardous materials, which may explain the absence of detailed Soviet or Allied reporting in the immediate post-war years. Archival fragments from the SS Hauptamt, recovered from Bavarian repositories, corroborate that certain Ahnenerbe projects were prioritized for evacuation and preservation, implying the Thule's secret mission was a continuation of Himmler's directive to safeguard the Institute's work even as Nazi Germany collapsed. Interviews with retired naval officers and civilian maritime workers indicate that the evacuation of specialized cargo was treated with extreme secrecy, with only select personnel aware of the ship's true contents. Contemporary historians argue that the Thule represents a nexus of military, scientific, and ideological preservation, where a single vessel became the repository for knowledge and materials the Reich deemed too valuable to abandon. Despite repeated sonar expeditions and archival research, no definitive trace of the vessel's cargo or final disposition has been established, leaving the fate of the transported artifacts unresolved. The lost convoy of Operation Hannibal illustrates the blurred boundaries between civilian evacuation and clandestine military scientific operations in wartime, revealing how the imperatives of secrecy, ideological preservation, and technological acquisition could converge in a single maritime enigma. The Thule's disappearance underscores the persistent gaps in our understanding of the war's final months, as well as the enduring consequences of hidden logistical operations that reshaped post-war knowledge networks, influencing both Allied intelligence and early Cold War scientific initiatives. The shadows cast by these operations linger long after the guns fell silent, leaving questions that defy closure. What truly became of Division 731's personnel and their data once integrated into American laboratories? Did the secrets of Project Lyra alter the trajectory of Cold War technology beyond what is recorded? Red Mercury and the Prague cache hint at experiments and materials that may still exist, hidden from public scrutiny, while the Baltic listening posts and the lost MV Thule suggest a continuum of surveillance, deception, and preservation that blurred the end of war into a prolonged covert struggle. Each file, tape, and rusted container is a fragment of a history deliberately obscured, inviting inquiry and challenging the narratives we accept. As archives continue to be unearthed and intelligence records slowly declassified, the question remains, how much of the true legacy of World War II and its shadow conflicts has yet to be revealed? And how far do these hidden threads reach into the present?